Welcome back to the Cover 3 podcast here on CBS Sports. That's Tom Fornelli, that's Bud Elliott, that's Danny Kanell. I'm Chip Patterson coming to you live on CBS Sports Network. Fired up to get you set for a big week ahead in the Big Ten, where we are going to do a little bit of a reset, particularly with a focus at the teams at the top of the conference, because we have found ourselves in a very interesting situation, because last season we saw Oregon join the Big Ten, go undefeated in conference play, finish as the Big Ten champions 13-0. We saw the Ohio State Buckeyes roll with that talented roster to the college football playoff national championship. Then you'd think there'd be a little bit of a step back, right? I mean, after all, Ohio State tied its school record with 14 NFL draft picks. Oregon set a new school record with 10 NFL draft picks. And yet, gentlemen, we look up at the rankings here as we prepare to enter October, and who's that? Oh gosh, these are the top two teams in the whole daggum country. Now that does not happen if you are not prepared to be able to reload and reset. And so we want to spend these first couple minutes really highlighting what we have seen from Ohio State and Oregon that has allowed them to get to this point where even after everything that they accomplished and everything they lost, we are looking at them as some of the best in the country. So let's start with the Buckeyes. And we have all submitted a couple players that we want to highlight. But before we get to the players, very quickly, Tom, first word to you, that from a storyline, big picture perspective, what's really stood out about what Ohio State has shown you through the first month of the season?
Just how, as we're going to talk about, the ability to reload. It's something that in previous years of college football was not, or it was pretty much the norm. You saw a lot of the best teams lose guys and reload because they had just recruited so well compared to everybody else. But now in the transfer portal era with, the COVID year of recent seasons and all that stuff, we didn't really have to see many teams reload that way because they were always able to go get veteran experience in the portal. So it was kind of a test case of, well, can you still do it that way? And I think to start the year, yeah, I think Ohio State's proving that you can, because it is a lot of new faces and they are still playing at an incredible level to where they still look like the best team in the country. And they've played two of the tougher opponents that most of the teams that you look at the top of the polls. You can argue Texas and a road trip to Washington are tougher games than anybody else has played so far.
I'll go look at an angle because I know we're going to dive into some of these players. What about the staff? The question marks that were around this coaching staff was been huge, and they lose Jim Knowles to Penn State was one of the bigger stories at the end of last season. What do? You go get Matt Patricia, who you could argue has been much different, but equally or more impressive as what you saw from last year with some of the more exotic coverages that he's running on the back end. And then when you lose Chip Kelly back to the NFL, you're able to elevate from within and go with Brian Hartline, who you really haven't seen much drop off. Now, yeah, I think Ryan Day has taken over a lot more of the play calling. It's more collaborative, but I thought the staff, the changes they made on the coaching staff have been some early that you've seen significant, where you have not seen that drop off at all on either side of the ball. So I think the coaching continuity and changes that you did make, I think those have been vital to Ohio State potentially running it back. Uh-oh.
Oh, we got him. We got him.
Got him.
Oh, no. I think it's just how ready you are on the defensive side of the football this early in the season with all the new pieces that you have, like the variety of coverages Ohio State can play, the ability to play man, to play match in the back end. They do a lot of sim pressures. They do so much different stuff. It's like, how in the world can a college team run this much defensive scheme with that many new pieces in the back end? It's really phenomenal.
All right, Bud, first word to you. Now we got to get to some players that we wanted to highlight, because if you're going to lose for Ohio State, 14 NFL draft picks, that means that you've got some players who've been able to step up and make a big impact early. So who are some of those new names that have really stood out to you, Bud?
All right, so I would look here at Arvell Reese. Arvell Reese might be the best linebacker in the country, guys. Like if you think about it, Ohio State has faced two really talented young quarterbacks so far in Arch Manning and Damon Williams, and they have absolutely dominated both these guys. Both these guys are dudes who can hurt you with their legs, and really, Arvell Reese just absolutely eliminated them. Like his ability to close space, to be in passing lanes with his length and his speed, I don't really think there's another backer in college football right now who's playing quite as good as Arvell Reese, so I would certainly take a look at him. We knew Ohio State lost so many of those impact pass rushers off last year's team. Caden Curry, guy's been in the program now for 3 years. He's finally stepping up. It's quite a nod to Ohio State's player development staff. And then on the offensive side, they lost Josh to the Kansas City Chiefs, a really good player off last year's offensive line. They lost Donovan Jackson. Austin Severeld has played extremely well for these guys. In the playoffs, they're going to face some really, really awesome pass rushers. They already did against Texas, and I thought he held his own in that game. It kind of gives me confidence that Ohio State can run this thing back and repeat as national champions.
Tom, who are you looking at?
I don't know if you guys have heard, but the NCAA has taken so many losses in court when it comes to eligibility in recent years that Bo Jackson's back. He found more eligibility, and he's currently playing running back for Ohio State. Yeah, no, I'm serious. Ohio State, Bo Jackson is playing running back. Okay, so it's a different Bo Jackson, but it's the same position, and so far kind of looks like the original Bo Jackson back from Auburn way back in the day. This is a guy who wasn't really coming into the season to be the starter. They brought in C.J. Donaldson from West Virginia, is supposed to be the bell cow, but he's not really the most explosive back you're going to see. He's more of the get 3-4 yards and keep the chains moving guy. Jackson has been an explosive force for them in the run game. We saw him really go off against Grambling in Ohio, and he also played very well on the road against Washington, rushing for 80 yards. He looks like somebody who could be a future star, the next great Ohio State running back. So that's somebody that we definitely need to keep an eye on. And on the defensive side of the ball, Caleb Downs gets a lot of attention, and deservedly so, because he's one of the best players in the country. But there's another safety in that Ohio State defense, a young kid. He's a sophomore, Jalen McClain, who I have been very impressed with to start the year. He has looked very good. He's got 19 tackles. He's broken up a pass. And I thought that in coverage, he has not been a liability at all. And we saw last week against Washington, he struggled a little bit in the run game, but I thought that he counted himself very well holding up against receivers in coverage. And I think having those two guys at the back, but as you were kind of mentioning with what Ohio State's been able to do defensively, I think those two are a big reason why, because they give you versatility that most teams just do not have.
So I think the most important position in the game is quarterback, and that has been the most important find for them, has been not only Julian Sain, the way he's been playing, but hitting on Julian Sain. How many schools did we look at this year, including the school they faced in their first game of the season, had massive expectations because they had 5 stars in front of their name and they were supposed to take that next step forward, and those teams are struggling. Well, guess what Julian Sain is doing? He's doing exactly what they need him to do. And I think it's setting up perfectly for them because he didn't have any playing experience. He steps into a lineup, wins the starting job. He's got great talent around him, and they're kind of taking baby steps forward with him. He's crushing it, making great decisions with the football. He's incredibly accurate. They're putting him in positions to succeed, where I think at the end of the year, you might see somebody who's not just a game manager, but somebody who actually a difference maker at the end of the season. So clearly in any reload, you have to hit on the quarterback position. And early after the first month of the season, it looks like the Buckeyes hit with Julian Sain.
Danny, quick follow-up just for you. One of our storylines going into the game against Washington was about whether, he would be allowed to get out there and let it rip, whether he had been protected a little bit. The game itself was a little bit difficult because the defense was so dominant, I will admit, but did you see anything from Sain against Washington that lets you feel like you're starting to see some progression in terms of how much he's allowed to get out there and maybe play outside of the limitations of the system?
No, there were a couple opportunities before half, too, where they could have been a little bit more aggressive in the 2-minute drill, and they decided, take a knee, go to halftime, which I think is totally normal. It's expected, the way your defense was playing. There weren't a lot of throws down the field, and we talked this about the cover 3 yesterday, and Tom was saying, well, there weren't many opportunities to do that, and that might have been the case, which is then a good thing if you see Julian Sain not trying to force the ball down the field to a Jeremiah Smith. So I think it's probably a combination of both. And, the couple situations, Jeremiah Smith touchdown pass, Washington brings pressure. They have lined up on the line of scrimmage. It was a great play call. He knew exactly where to throw it. It was a pretty easy throw, gets the touchdown pass. So he's operating and doing exactly what they're asking of him, but I don't think they've sort of just let it go and said, all right, we're just going to trust him with the full scope of the offense and be as aggressive as they want to, but it really doesn't matter now. It matters just like the load management last year. I think they're kind of picking their spots to let Julian Sain kind of open up this offense.
Yeah, I like that. When we discussed this topic yesterday in terms of, ways we'd be able to look at Ohio State and from a different angle, look at the reload, the number one name is one that's actually already been said here, but it was defensive end Caden Curry, because that is teams that are able to reload, the national championship contenders that don't peak. They are just every single year showing up with a team that's ready to go, because with 5 sacks so far through the first month of the season, he has already doubled his output from last year. Curry currently tied for the lead in the Big Ten of all Big Ten defenders with 5 sacks on the season. And as Bud mentioned, what an incredible nod to the program development, because you've got changeover on the defensive staff, and yet you still have somebody ready to be the next man up. He clearly learned something playing behind the likes of Big Bear Jack Sawyer out of JTT, and now he is ready to have his number called. This is not an Ohio State team that just brings in players that are going to be one and done. This is not a team full of mercenaries. This is an Ohio State team that competes for national championships. I mean, they spend money too, sure, but they also make sure that you are developing and that you are going to be ready by the time you are an upperclassman. So I think that he exemplifies one of the reasons why Ryan Day's program is one of the most healthy in the entire country, and definitely why you don't have to rebuild when you're Ohio State. You reload, and Caden Curry is a great example of that. Well, coming up on the other side, we turn our attention from the number 1 team in the country to the number 2 team in the country as Oregon moves up into that spot. The Ducks lost 10 players to the NFL draft, including their quarterback. So what stands out about this year's team and what's been special for the Ducks? We'll get into all that and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast as we continue to unpack the anatomy of a reload, because after winning the national championship in Ohio State's case and after winning the Big Ten in Oregon's case, maybe there was going to be a step back. That's why Penn State got all the preseason hype. And yet coming out of Oregon's double overtime win in Happy Valley, the Ducks have found themselves once again making a case to be not just the best team in the Big Ten, but one of the best teams in the entire country. We've all found a couple of players that best represent how this reload has worked out so well for Dan Lanning's group out there in Eugene. But before we turn the spotlight to the players, just looking at this Ducks program and looking at this team through the first month of the season, Tom, what do you think has been some of the important factors that have contributed to a strong performance?
I mean, it's not all that dissimilar to what we were talking about with Ohio State in the last segment, where, these are both programs that had a lot of roster turnover coming off of very successful seasons last year. Although I guess Oregon would probably tell you it was a bittersweet success given that they lost in their first playoff game to the Buckeyes, but they did win the Big Ten. And you looked at all the new guys, the new faces, Dante Moore, who had experience at quarterback at UCLA a few years ago, but hadn't really seen much significant playing time the last couple of years as he was sitting behind Dylan Gabriel last year. He stepped in and played well. And the one difference is, as Danny mentioned in the last segment, Ohio State had turnover at the coaching staff on the defensive coordinator and the offensive coordinator. Oregon's had consistency. So what we've really just seen is Dan Lanning's program building really starting to pay fruits with the recruiting classes that they've put together, because this is the first team where I think predominantly the significant contributors are kids that they recruited out of high school who are now stepping into larger roles. And I think that you are seeing that those stars that were next to their names, they were correctly placed there because they're all very talented.
Tom, sticking in that vein, let's go to the Oregon's linebacking core. Bryce Bosher was a baseball kid who came into Oregon, walked onto the football team, promptly gained 45 pounds after getting drafted in baseball, and is now a freakazoid linebacker for the Ducks. Jerry Mixon, same thing. Really hadn't seen the guy play a ton. In-house kid, good program development by Oregon. Oregon's linebackers are nasty, and we just didn't know necessarily a ton about this Oregon defense coming into the year, but they have, these young guys are showing up, and now it's their time to shine, and they really are.
When I look at this team, I had a feeling that we were kind of sleeping on them a little bit. Even though they were in the preseason top 10, it was either a lot of people picked Penn State, some people picked Ohio State to repeat. And we forgot that they were undefeated and had a perfect run through the Big Ten championship last year. But you know who I don't think that went overlooked by was Dan Lanning, because the chip on the shoulder mentality, or just a killer instinct or an intensity that is just off the charts, it is relentless, and that is embodied in their head coach. When you see him on the sideline, when you hear him talk to the media, when you see the focus and motivation that he brings to this team, I don't know if we gave it proper consideration coming in, but it will not become overlooked ever again, because he feels like they're on a mission, and that Rose Bowl loss to Ohio State is something that's lingered entire offseason and rubbed Dan Lanning and those players the wrong way. That's why I think they're so dangerous, and I think you saw that on display against Penn State.
Danny, every SEC message board is trying to get Dan Lanning as their head coach. You know, NFL teams are hoping they can get Dan Lanning as the head coach. And yet, you know what I'm seeing from Dan Lanning? His phrase, unfinished business. That's what you're talking about right there. That's the chip on the shoulder that they've got there in Eugene. Special coach, special coaching staff they've been able to hold together. We did want to turn the spotlight to some players. Danny, I'll let you get first word there. Who are some players that best exemplify the anatomy of the reload?
I'm going to look at the defensive side of the ball, because I think the defense might be better than it was last year. So it starts with having guys kind of continue to develop. And Mateo Uyunglele last year kind of had a breakout season, and this year he's one of the best defensive players in the entire country. I mean, he's coming off the edge, and he's really just been an imposing force. And then it's the ability to add guys to the transfer portal. Bear Alexander has never reached expectations, whether it was at Georgia, whether it was USC. But all of a sudden, guess who started to show up a couple times in critical situations? Bear Alexander for the Oregon Ducks, which is a huge depth piece. I think that's the difference between the top teams and the teams that are just below there, is the ability to have depth, so that when your guys get tired, or, you know, if you have injuries, God forbid, that you have those depth players come there. And it was a luxury item to me to bring in Bear Alexander, take that risk. But that risk so far looks like it's paid off pretty big.
You know, Danny, go ahead, Tom.
I was just going back to the Dan Lanning. Where did he come from? He came from Georgia. So he spent a lot of time on Kirby Smart's staff, and he saw that the best way to build a national title contender was to make sure that your lines of scrimmage were strong. And we saw Oregon coming into this year having to replace a lot of guys on the offensive and defensive line. And so far, early returns suggest they've done a very good job. On the defensive side of the ball, Danny, you just mentioned Bear Alexander. I'll talk about one of the guys lining up next to him, and Amori Washington, who saw some time last year as part of the rotation, but has stepped into a starting role for that team this year and has been an absolute force stopping the run and plugging up the middle of the A gaps and just taking players out and not giving up anything. I'd like to see him take a little bit more of a step forward as far as disrupting the passing attack and collapsing the pocket, but I think that's in there, and he just hasn't had to do it to this point. And then on the offensive side of the ball, we saw they have to bring in a whole bunch of new players for there too, and they brought in Emmanuel Pregnon from USC, who honestly, when I watched last year, I wasn't all that impressed by. So when I saw Oregon go after him in the portal, I was kind of like, I was a little skeptical, but man, I was wrong, because he is playing fantastic for this team. I think go back to watch Saturday night against Penn State, against one of the best defenses in the country in a really difficult environment to play in. He was the best guy on that offensive line. I thought he had a phenomenal game, and going forward, I think that's going to pay off huge for the Ducks.
You know, Tom, staying on the development curve here. Has anybody played quarterback better in the country through the first month of the season than Dante Moore? Like, I think him leaving UCLA and going to get the developmental year of sitting the bench, learning the system, learning how to play the position of quarterback, you know, on the bench for Oregon, that has helped him so much. I mean, I think there's a couple guys you make an argument for, but the list is really short. Like, he's operating at such a high level. The moment was not too big for him in Happy Valley. Very few places in the sport are as intimidating as that in a whiteout, you know, at night in Penn State. Dante's just been so good.
I'm going to go to the running back position, where they are traveling like, I don't know. I mean, they got like 8 guys on the roster. The travel roster has about 7 running backs as well. They work in new bodies all the time. And yet, while we were looking at some certain transfer portal additions, while we knew what they had in Noah Whittington, who's been, you know, working his way back to full health, I cannot be any more impressed with freshman running back De'Aaron Hill. Currently, he's leading the team only with, 270 yards on the season because of that timeshare. But, man, he stepped up with so many key runs against Penn State. He's averaging about 10 yards per carry. He's got that explosive ability. And the offensive line, which I think is another maybe unsung aspect of the way that this Oregon team, Danny, to your point, might be even better in certain areas from where they were last season. The offensive line is opening up holes, and De'Aaron Hill is just getting through there and making big plays. When we talk about the depth, when we talk about the expectations that this Oregon team could be playing 15, 16 or more games into this season, the fact that they've got a freshman who's already prepared for the big lights of going up against a Penn State defense in Happy Valley, and he answers the call. Man, what an impressive evaluation by the Oregon staff, and what great work by De'Aaron Hill to be able to say, yes, I am ready in this loaded running back room to jump up and to deliver the plays that are needed. So, I mean, whether it is the development, whether it is the evaluation, there just seems to be, from transfer portal to recruiting out of high school, everything is clicking for this Oregon team, and that's why they've already logged one of the best wins in the entire country, going on the road to beat Penn State. Which brings us to Penn State. Coming up on the other side, how do we bounce back from another loss to a top 10 team? Was it really that bad? I mean, after all, they made it to double overtime. What is the path ahead? How does Penn State bounce back? We'll get into all that and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast as we continue to work our way around the Big Ten. We, of course, have discussed in detail ways that Ohio State and Oregon were able to get out of successful seasons last year. And here, as we enter October, they will find themselves at the top of not just the conference, but the entire daggum country. But what about that team that was on the losing end of the double overtime result in Happy Valley? Because while Penn State now has a little bit of a drop in the AP Top 25 poll to number 7 and already a loss there in the conference standings, they still can accomplish everything that they want this season. But they've got to figure out a way to bounce back. They've got to figure out a way to be able to make sure that one loss doesn't become 2 or more. Now, this weekend, listen, we got to have some intellectual integrity here. I'm not putting them on upset alert as they go across the country to play UCLA. They are heavy, heavy favorites in the game. But I do think that we can start this Saturday with the UCLA game and in the weeks ahead to start to have a little bit of a wish list. Or how about maybe a to-do list for James Franklin's squad in terms of what we want to see and what they need to do. And so, Tom, why don't you go ahead and get us started here? What should be on that list for Penn State to make sure that they sort of flush that, steady the ship, and then try to reach the championship level that they need to be able to still accomplish all their goals?
Well, first thing that should happen is UCLA should write on the chalkboard that Chip Patterson says you have no chance of winning this game, just, to get that kind of the juices flowing. As for Penn State, I think it's very important not to let one loss become 2, because the way that things happened last week, losing at home to Oregon in another huge matchup at home, whiteout with your comeback in the fourth quarter and then losing in overtime, like you can't lick your wounds just because you lost that game again. There's still plenty of business to take care of, and there's still a lot that this team can accomplish. It's just one loss. And in the modern era of college football, one loss doesn't kill anything. You could still win the Big Ten. You could still get to the playoff. You could still win a national title. And if you're going to do that, you need your defense to keep playing like it did on Saturday night against Oregon. We talked about this on the show earlier this week. Oregon is one of the best offenses in the country. When the year is over, it will be a top 5 offense. And Penn State pretty much shut it down as well as anybody can shut that team down for 4 quarters in Happy Valley. That's the kind of thing you can rely on week in and week out. When you have to play Ohio State later this year, you can slow down that offense because you slowed down Oregon. You can slow down Indiana because you slowed down Oregon. The key will be, can your offense do enough to help you win those games? That's where I'm not nearly as convinced, because I do think part of what we saw with that comeback was a symptom of the problem with Penn State's offense, particularly at the quarterback position. Drew Aller started making plays late in that game because he couldn't afford to be conservative. He had to take shots even if they weren't perfectly wide open shots. He didn't do any of that in the first 3 quarters. That's been his problem pretty much his entire career. He does not take chances when he's there. He doesn't trust himself to be too aggressive. So I think you need to start coaching into Drew Aller. Hey, that guy that was in the fourth quarter, you can be that in the first quarter too, bud. You can take those kind of shots down the field to your receivers. We went out in the portal and we spent money on those guys for a reason. Put some trust in them.
I agree with Tom on a lot of that. I think Aller opening at the offense would definitely have some benefits for Penn State. But guys, they just played what is probably the number 1 or number 2 team in the country to double overtime. Like, Penn State is playing at an elite level. They may not be quite as good as Ohio State, but they may not be quite as good as Oregon. But I don't think there's like serious things that are wrong with this team or with this program. They're just not quite as good as maybe like the top 2 teams in the sport. So I say, like, just stay the course, keep doing what you're doing. Keep getting better throughout the course of the season, stay healthy, and see if you can make some magic happen in the playoff. Like, they're one play away from playing for the national title last year. Like, I think they're a lot better than what a lot of the reaction, not necessarily much, just from what I've seen on Twitter and stuff. Like, they're not broken. They're still a really damn good football team.
You guys ever chop down a tree? Like a really, really big tree?
Every day.
Do you cut it down?
Yeah.
Do you cut it? Yeah, of course. Do you cut it down with one chop? No.
Yeah.
That's why I'm going to take this. Is what I don't have an axe handy, but I do have this sweet Don Mattingly signed baseball bat from back in the day. It's a great one. Here's what you got to do. You got to keep chopping. You got to keep, every coach I've ever played for has used this as some sort of visual of what you have to do throughout the course of a season. Penn State needs to just keep chopping wood. And this last hurdle they have to get over, which James Franklin's record against top 5 teams is a very good obstacle, and it's a good visual. That is like a redwood tree that they have just put a tiny dent in, but they're not close to knocking it down. They just have to keep chopping wood. To Bud's point, stay the course, continue to improve. Don't hang your head. Don't let this game become 2, like Tom said. You just have to keep doing the little things, paying attention to the detail, showing up every week. And I do think this team will be taking away from that game. We were this close to potentially winning that, because what if Drew Aller, instead of throwing an interception, does throw a touchdown pass and they somehow win that game? It is a completely different complexion, but they didn't get blown out. They did come back from 17-3. They just need to keep chopping wood. Eventually that big tree will come tumbling down.
No, I
Danny,
think
did you carve that bat out of a tree you chopped down?
Yes, and I did. It took a long time. It took a lot of shaping.
Fantastic work by our woodsmith, Danny Kanell. No, I think you light a fire under this team. I think you embrace the urgency that is at hand, because, we were just there, but you were also just there against Notre Dame. You were also just there against Ohio State when the Buckeyes were in your house and the place is going nuts after a pick 6 early in the game, early last November. I mean, there's all these times where Penn State's been just there, and that is the frustration. I think they take a page out of Notre Dame 2024. I think they take a page from Marcus Freeman and the way that the Fighting Irish handled business. Because while Penn State can just stay the course and probably go 10-2 and probably make the college football playoff, I think that this should be trying to say, hey, when it was 17-3 and our backs are against the wall, we had urgency with the way that we handled business. We got the scores we needed. We got the stops we needed. I think there is an incredible lesson to be learned there, because watching the game, there was a little bit of a, well, where has this been all game? And game script matters, and both sides ended up participating in allowing Penn State to climb back into that game. But I think looking at that result and saying, hey, we were just one play away from taking down Oregon, I think that is absolving yourself of mistakes that were made in terms of the way that business was handled. I feel like for Penn State, you play with your hair on fire. You put teams in the ground, and it starts on Saturday on America's Most Watched Network, the Network of Stars, playing out in the Rose Bowl against UCLA. Get out there and show out the way that Indiana did last year when they went out there and took care of business. Because if you're Penn State and you just even win this game, just kind of going through the motions, it's not going to be the rhythms or the habits that you need to be able to win that game at the end of the year when it's going to be a one possession and you've got to deliver. I think that there's really something to be gained from the urgency here. Am I way over my skis on this one? Am I overblowing this?
No, because
No, not at all.
but it'd be one thing if they had showed it the first 3 games. The first 3 games were very average for Penn State. That's what has me mildly concerned. Like maybe this team was overrated. And to Chip's point, go show everybody that you weren't overrated. Like you should destroy UCLA this weekend. Go out and do it. Start building that confidence. And I love all the suggestions, especially going to maybe even no huddle out of the gate. Like pretend like it's a 2-minute drill. Let Drew Aller throw the football down the field. Start opening things up. Don't play conservative. Be aggressive. And I even tell Drew Aller, hey, I don't care if you throw an interception or 2. I want you to stretch the field vertically. Force the ball downfield because this is the type of game you would think that wouldn't kill you. You're not going to get beat, if you give up, 10 points to UCLA. You should be able to go out there and have a massive monster performance on offense. I would like to see this offense wake up sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and as you were saying, Danny, like they looked so subpar in non-conference play, and we talked about it last week. Can we just expect this team to flip the switch and suddenly be firing on all cylinders? Perhaps that's why they struggled so much early in the game, because they couldn't just flip it and turn it on and start going 100% right away with the way that they played at non-conference. So I agree with you, Chip. There is a sense of urgency now. You cannot relax. You've got the loss just because everything is possible. And just because, UCLA is a team you should beat, don't treat them that way. Don't treat it the same way you treated that non-conference game. Go on the road, take a team that has fired its coach, that looks defeated, that many people are wondering will even win a game this year, and bury them. Beat them by 40, beat them by 50, if for nothing else but to instill confidence in yourself as you head into tougher games down the road.
I'd like to see them play some of these young guys at receiver potentially to see if maybe somebody under the lights emerges, because they did an okay job in the transfer portal. I think their receivers are better than what they were last year, but the overall group of pass catchers is not better than what you had last year because you don't have Tyler Warren on this team. He's balling out for the Indianapolis Colts. So maybe there's a young guy you want to try out. I know Devontae Ross emerged a little bit later in that game. Those are mostly schemed up touches for him. Maybe there's a young guy that in practice is just okay. Throw him out there late in the blowout. Maybe he just shows a little more ability to be a gamer, to win on some of these one-on-one situations. Because right now, I don't have anybody on Penn State who I trust to get open one-on-one in obvious passing downs. I just don't. When they scheme it up, it's great. But when you have to win in negative leverage situations, I don't think Penn State has that guy on this team.
A healthy set of suggestions, a lengthy to-do list, exactly what I'm sure James Franklin wants to hear from us as he's reaching out to the Cover 3, coaching consultation services. But Penn State, the path begins this Saturday. They're going to be out playing against UCLA in the Rose Bowl. You can watch it on America's Most Watched Network, the network of stars, CBS. You can stream it on Paramount Plus. Kickoff at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Well, coming up on the other side, we're starting to hit that point in the season where the teams that are on the fringe of whether they are going to make it to the postseason, the critical games are at hand. We're going to play a Cover 3 Classic. It's a bowl or no bowl, Big Ten edition, and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, as we prepare for Week 6 in college football, it's time to take a step back and it's time to look at where some of these teams are. Now, we've run through, what we've seen from Ohio State and Oregon, what we would like to see from Penn State. But let's work our way down in the conference because there are some teams with games in the coming weeks that are going to determine whether or not they are going bowling. It's a Cover 3 Classic. We call it bowl or no bowl. So we're going to begin with the Iowa Hawkeyes. Now, Iowa is 3-2 on the season. The remaining schedule includes some home games, hooray, but oh no, against the likes of Penn State and Oregon. They also get Minnesota and Michigan State there in Kinnick Stadium. Now, they are off here in Week 6, but they'll return to action at Wisconsin. They also have road dates at USC and at Nebraska. Bud Elliott, I'm seeing a lot of teams that I like on this Iowa remaining schedule. At 3-2, are the Iowa Hawkeyes bowl or no bowl?
Chip, it's kind of crazy that we're even having this discussion, but that is where we are with the Hawkeyes right now. I'm going to go bowl. for Iowa. I think they'll be favored at a Wisconsin team that's falling apart, right? They'll be a slight favorite at home against Minnesota. There'll be a slight favorite at home against Michigan State. So that's 3 games in which you'll be favored. And then I do like their chances of taking one at USC or at Nebraska. USC is dealing with a lot of injuries. We don't know how well those guys are going to bounce back. And Nebraska, has shown some real limitations along the lines of scrimmage this year. I do think that Iowa offensive line can bully that Nebraska defensive front, just as Michigan and Cincinnati have done in the first month of this season. So I think there's a pretty good chance they get 3 out of those 5 that I listed. I don't see them beating Penn State or Oregon.
But we wouldn't have said we see them beating Indiana, and they had Indiana on the ropes. That was a tight game. Iowa's going to do what they always do. They're going to beat the teams they're supposed to, and they're probably not going to beat the teams they're not supposed to. You mentioned the games they're favored against. I think they get 3 easily. I think it's an easy, they're going bowling. It's just a matter of if they get to 7 or not, and are they able to shock one of those teams. I don't see them beating Penn State or Oregon. Maybe they would, have them in a potential fourth quarter game, best case scenario. But I do think maybe they surprise USC or Nebraska on the road.
I'm going to go with yes by the skin of their beaks. I think that you look at the Oregon and Penn State games, and Danny, I would disagree. Ask a Penn State fan how confident they are about going into Kinnick Stadium and coming away with a win. And I also think matchup-wise, my concern with Iowa defensively is their secondary. I think Penn State's a team they could match up with if Penn State doesn't take a step forward in the passing game. I think the Hawkeyes can give that offense all sorts of problems and kind of make that a close, grimy game where maybe a turnover or a special teams play really tilts things on its head. But I still would take Penn State to win it. And I do think there are winnable games. It's just that I don't have as much faith and confidence in this Iowa team as I have had in recent years. Offensively, I'm still not entirely sold, which is nothing new, but defensively is where the real concern is because, as I mentioned, I don't think they're that good in the secondary, at least not compared to what you're used to in Iowa. So I think a lot of these games are far more coin flips than they probably would have been in recent seasons. So I think they get there, but I think it's going to be close.
Yeah, I am feeling like Nebraska would have the edge in the game at the end of the season where I thought that might have been a coin flip. So I think they get to 6, but I am not ready to say 7 or more. I will reluctantly say bowl as well. All right, what about the Maryland Terrapins? Off right now to a 4-0 start on the season. Mike Locksley has navigated a very manageable non-conference schedule, FAU, NIU, and Towson. Then they went on the road and they got a victory against Wisconsin that kind of had us all snapping our eyes up. Obviously, looking at Malik Washington, the excellent freshman quarterback, and the other pieces on a reloaded roster. Now, in the next couple of weeks, they get visits from both Washington and Nebraska before heading out to play UCLA, but they also have Indiana left. They also have Illinois left. They also have Michigan left. So while they are undefeated for right now, a lot of the tough games are left on the schedule. Tom Fornelli, Maryland Terrapins, bowl or no bowl as they sit here at 4-0.
I am saying bowl with a very high level of confidence, which is not something I would have expected to be saying just a month ago, right before the season was starting, because I did not have overly high hopes for the Terps coming off of a very bad season last year and having to rely on a freshman quarterback. But man, that freshman quarterback's pretty good, isn't he, fellas? And I think that when you look at that schedule, there's an argument to be made that Maryland will have the edge at quarterback in most of those games. And yeah, there's some tough games, but I'm just going to say this right now. I'm not saying it will happen, but 9-3 is not off the table for this Maryland team. I think it is within the realm of possibilities of possible outcomes. Yeah, this team's going bowling. The only question will be is how many wins do they finish with? 7, 8, or maybe 9.
Wow. I agree, but would any of us be surprised that they were 4-0, especially if you knew Wisconsin was playing another, backup quarterback again? But I am with you because I think it's been the way they've won these games. There has not been a close game yet. They have been dominant. The defense has been much improved as well. And I think they found a potential star in Malik Washington. 8 touchdowns and just 1 interception on the season. And he looked comfortable as a true freshman, outplaying a lot of quarterbacks out there that had much higher expectations. That infuses a belief and a confidence throughout a locker room that I don't think this Maryland team has had in quite some time. So yeah, I don't know if I'd go as high as 9, but I would be willing to say they're going to pull off a surprise upset on here. And I think the other 2 games that they win, they'll probably be favored in. So I say yes, absolutely, they're going bowling.
I think it's a little bit closer than what you guys think here, right? They beat FAU, who got crushed at home by Memphis. They beat NIU, who lost at home to San Diego State. Towson, okay, and then they beat a Wisconsin team that's pretty obviously falling apart. They're about to play some really good quarterbacks. You got to play Damon Williams. You got to play Dylan Raiola. You got to play Nico, who's, okay, whatever. You have to play Mendoza at Indiana. Kelly McManus is playing amazingly well at Rutgers right now with not a lot of talent around him. You got to play Altmaier. You got to play Underwood for Michigan. And then you also have to play Childs for Michigan State. So I know they're 4-0. I think this is going to be a struggle. I do think that Malik Washington is good enough to get them to 6. But I don't know about – but 9-3 would be remarkably good, given that you're going to play a lot of quarterbacks down the stretch here who are going to be playing in the NFL.
Okay, all right. Now, you just mentioned Michigan State. You just mentioned Aiden Childs. Let's get one more in here before we've got to hit a break, because Michigan State right now is 3-1 and ahead in week 6. They'll be out at Nebraska. They still have road trips to Indiana and Minnesota. They've got home games against Michigan and Penn State. And you mentioned that Ford Field game at the end of the year. Danny, I'm looking at this and I can only comfortably hand this Michigan State team one more win on here. I mean, am I crazy? Michigan State with this remaining schedule, do you think this is bowl or no bowl for Jonathan Smith?
I'm going to say it's no bowl, and it has nothing to do with Aiden Childs. It has much more to do about a defense, which has been a sieve. They did get the win against Boston College in overtime. They also allowed 45 points to USC. I think there's going to be a lot of these games where you're facing some explosive offenses, including Dylan Raiola, some of the top-tier quarterbacks physically. Can you handle Michigan? I don't think so. I think they're going to be underdogs in most of these games. That Maryland game will be very interesting because it is at home, but we just talked about Maryland. I feel better about them than I do against Michigan State. So I'm going to say, unfortunately, they're going to miss a bowl at 5-7.
I agree with Danny. I think they barely missed a bowl. I was pretty high on this team, I think, relative to expectations. They do look a little bit better last year than they did last year at full strength. But all the injuries piling up and all the really good quarterbacks in the Big Ten you have to play down the stretch, I think they narrowly miss out on a bowl there in East Lansing.
Yeah, I'm going no as well. I do think the defense is a problem, and while I do believe Aiden Childs has improved his decision-making and his accuracy, I still think he's taking way too long to get rid of the ball, and as they start facing tougher defenses than they faced to this point this year, I think that's going to rear its ugly head. So no, I don't have Sparty going bowling this year.
Man, tough spot. We knew the program was in a tough position when Jonathan Smith took over, but things have not been going as expected. I will agree with the gang here. I think I've got it as no bowl for Michigan State, and that even is after getting a swing game in the non-con, the double overtime win against Boston College. Well, coming up on the other side, every single week, we like to leave you with a player to watch in the Big Ten. We'll tell you who that is and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast as we get you set for week 6 in the Big Ten. Always like to leave you with a player to watch. Danny Kanell, who's your Big Ten player to watch?
Aaron Judge has to have a big day at the plate today for the Yankees. Oh, wait, that's another game. Let's go Yankees. Get it going. I'm going to look at Michigan State's Mekhi Frazier. If Michigan State, we were just talking about them having a bowl game, they have to pull off a run game. That was the one thing against Nebraska that Michigan struggled against the run defense. So Mekhi Frazier, Michigan State's running back, needs to take over some of that load, keep the ball away from Dylan Raiola and that Nebraska offense. So Mekhi Frazier, Michigan State's running back.
I'm going to go with the guy we talked about in the last segment. I'm going to go with Maryland quarterback Malik Washington, who has been balling out as a freshman. He might save Mike Loxley's job if you look at how he's performed so far this season. He's completing 60% of his passes, but he's had 14 passes dropped by his receivers, so it should be much higher. He's making NFL throws every single week. He's somebody to keep an eye on.
I'm going to go Anthony Smith of Minnesota. If you watched him last week against Rutgers, he absolutely killed the Scarlet Knights. This is somebody we talked about today on the Cover 3 Recruiting Hour. Check it out on our YouTube channel every Tuesday. Anthony Smith, really good D lineman for the Gophers.
And I'm going to go with Michigan running back Justice Haynes. He's got the explosive ability. He is the workhorse. We get to see Michigan back in action You'll want to watch him because he's a big key to the Wolverines and what they want to accomplish this season. Well, what we want to accomplish is have you come join us over on the Cover 3 podcast. You can join us at 11 a.m. every single Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, and at 11:30 p.m. on Saturday nights at youtube.com/cover3. Of course, you can get the podcast whenever you're available. All you got to do is scan that QR code on the screen.